Hey everyone. Thanks for joining me today as I take you through storytelling, your internal calm's secret weapon. My name's Greg and I'm the head of storytelling here at Interact. If at any time you have any questions during this webinar, you can always ask them by going to the Go-To interface. You can add your questions here and we can answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Think of the last time you heard a story. What did it sound like? What did it feel like? How did it change your perception of a person or a topic this story covered? Did it persuade you to take action or maybe demand change? We have all heard it. Stories go back to the very basic reason why humans are so successful as a species. They have helped generations of people uplift and shape their culture. They have taught others how to survive, and most importantly, they have created community with those who share value in the messages that they've heard within the story. Science has shown us that when a story is being told, our brains react, and our emotions rise. It's that very science that has proven time and time again that we remember something best when we can attach our own feelings to it. When we are moved as human beings, we retain and we learn. That is pretty powerful when we, as communicators, need our employees to remember something or learn something new. So what is exactly happening to our brains when we experience a story? Well, science has shown us that a story activates parts in the brain that allow the listener to turn the story into their own ideas and experience thanks to a process called neural coupling. It also shows listeners will not only experience the similar brain activity to each other, but also to the speaker telling the story. The brain releases dopamine into the system when it experiences an emotionally charged event, making it easier to remember with greater accuracy. When processing facts, two areas of the brain are activated. A well-told story can engage many additional areas, including the motor cortex, sensory cortex, and the frontal cortex. It's no wonder why story has moved our human species forward through the years. Biologically speaking, our brains were made for it. We know that storytelling is nothing new. And in fact, many brands have discovered that storytelling to their internal audience can create community and advocacy for the organization. That type of movement can increase engagement and help reduce turnover of employees. This is especially important when we look at stats like 33% of employees are not engaged at their job. 51% of employees are actively looking for new jobs. And increasing employee engagement investment by about 10% can increase profits of $2,400 per employee per year. And if you're to add that up over the year, that's pretty significant. A brand or an organization with a solid story to tell can change the environment for all the employees that work for them. It can provide clarity and understanding of the organization and where it's headed. The story can align employees and provide a solid path for them to get to A to B without question. But if that story doesn't come across as authentic or even human enough, it can do the exact opposite. The path becomes confusing or even hard to move on. It makes the journey feel less seamless and ununified. Can you recall the last time you told a story? Do you recall if it was effective? Did it help you achieve what you were hoping to achieve? If it's hard to remember, maybe you can remember applying for the job that you're currently working at right now. The chances are you didn't just send your resume and hope for the best. You probably wrote a cover letter to go along with that resume. But why do we do that? Why is the cover letter to our resume so important? The reality is, facts alone are not good enough. They don't evoke emotion or connection to other humans. They don't make us think about a time in our own lives to help relate to the person. Your resume alone is not very human. It's likely a list of credentials and achievements, and maybe some volunteer work and skill sets. Your resume alone is just a list. Your cover letter is a chance to tell the hiring manager about yourself, to drive some kind of human connection between yourself and the reader without ever meeting them. It's a short story about you and your vision of yourself working for the company that you're applying for. If done well, you will likely get a call because you sparked interest and stood out among all the other candidates. A story, big or small, can change ordinary facts into something relatable. A story is the most powerful weapon that you have in your toolkit as a communicator. The word story, or even storytelling, is used often in the marketing world. It's used to imply that you should listen. But what is a story really? We can read and consume a lot of data in a day, but how do you recognize that a story is being shared with you? Well, the best way to take a look at this is by identifying what a story is not. Stories are not presentations. They're not monologues or pitches. They're not selling conversations or even a thesis. We should probably inject stories into these, but alone, they are not stories. But there are some core components to a story that can help us recognize one when we hear it. The first part, structure. There is structure to the piece. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Then there's elemental parts of the stories. Most stories will have clearly defined heroes, challenges, a journey, a resolution, change, and a call to action. Strategic. A story can spark the reader's imagination and have them relate to what they are reading. Ultimately, it motivates them to act. Authenticity. A story reveals a genuine part of the teller, which provokes emotion in the audience. So what goes into making a great story? Well, there are 7 ingredients to a great story that we all can connect to. The first one is trust. This is our feelings about the story being directly correlated to our feelings towards the storyteller. If we trust the storyteller, we're likely to listen. Familiarity. Stories that are familiar to the reader are more powerful to those that are not. Relatability. When listeners can relate and identify with a story, they are more likely to be persuaded. Simplicity. Keep it simple. If it doesn't serve the narrative, it shouldn't be in the story. Perception. Stories are most persuasive when readers work out their meanings for themselves. And immersion. The more readers submerge themselves in the story, the more likely they are to be affected by it. And the last key ingredient, drama. Stories that captivate, have dramatic development, and entice emotions in us. Now that we've seen a few things that need to be present in a story, we can start to create an outline to get all of our thoughts from our brains and onto the screen or paper. To map out our story, we need to nail down a plot. The plot to your story will give it structure, and if done right, it will keep your audience engaged throughout. The easiest way to start to think about your plot is to identify a beginning, middle, and an ending. We start the beginning of the story and identify the desire. The desire of the character or even your organization will connect your audience to the cause. As we reach the middle of our story, we introduce vital ingredients to the story, and that is conflict. Conflict is the fuel to your story. It's the one thing in your story that will invoke emotion and connect your audience to the message. Think about your favorite story, or maybe even film. In the first 20 to 35 minutes of that movie, or quarter of the book, you likely encountered the big conflict that the characters are interacting with. This conflict likely set up the entire story and kept you wanting more. Since conflict is found in 99% of the stories that you enjoy, we can see it in places like The Lion King. That conflict can be identified as person versus him or herself. And we see Simba, who struggles to understand who he is and what he is meant to be in the animal kingdom. In Life of Pi, we see conflict in the form of person versus nature. Not only is Pi Patel stranded, but he's stranded with a tiger on a boat. In Charlotte's Web, we see conflict in the form of person versus person. In Charlotte Webb's, Charlotte struggles against the farmer who intended to butcher Wilbur the pig. Conflict serves two very important things when it comes to storytelling. It demands the attention of our audience, and we as humans love conflict. It's likely why newspapers like the National Enquirer or People magazine catch your eyes with their brilliant conflict-drenched titles. Conflict will set up your story with the big question. It leaves your audience wondering if the conflict can be resolved at all. In business communication, you can use this to your advantage because it's likely that your organization exists to solve a problem. It's even more likely that every project or change that happens within your organization will happen to solve a problem or conflict within it. Conflict always kicks off the journey that your character is on, and it hooks us to learn how they overcame their challenges. We are hungry for the results, and we want to learn from them while they navigate their own conflict. As we come to the end of the story, we unravel the full resolution and the results that were achieved from overcoming the conflict. This is a great opportunity to open up the story for a call to action, or a hook into learning something more or something about your organization. If we were to take this concept and turn it into a template, you could use it by asking yourselves questions through each of these sections. Desire. What are the hopes and dreams of the character? Conflict. What has stopped them or made them reaching their desire complicated? Journey. What did it cause the character to do? Results. What happened as a result? And then the call to action. What do you want the audience to do as well? What can they learn? Let's take a look at this in action. There's this company out there called Inc., and they want to grow their customer base into Australia. Well, there's a problem with doing that. The conflict arises when the company realizes that there are legal restraints that make it hard for Inc. to cross borders. A journey arrives when we find out that it takes 2 years of legal advice and back and forth between the Australian government to reach some kind of agreement. This is where we would name the employees, the teams, and the departments that had to work tirelessly to make this come to life. Well, what are the results? Inc. is about to open its first Australian office with 6 new employees. And as a call to action, we'd like to remind all employees that our company is growing in a healthy way through celebrating our values. We'd also like them to read more by revisiting our company strategy that shows them that in 2020, we would like to grow some more. Now that you have an incredible story outlined, what do you do with it? Well, there are many mediums available in the workplace as a publishing location, but you do not want to choose them all. Failure to decide on the appropriate channel can lessen the effects of your content and even lead to communication overload in some cases. Know your audience and you will be able to make better decisions on which channel to use for what reasons. If you're looking for a place with interactive capabilities, then the number one choice for your storytelling posts is probably your intranet. Here, people have the ability to comment, share, and like posts, giving them more exposure and getting more employees engaged with the story you just told. Other mediums can be your employee newsletter, your company Facebook page, or even social channels like Instagram or Twitter. Sometimes these social pages make it easier to translate personal stories into a company brand in ways that more professional means would not. Consider creating a page just for employees, so they have a place to find open and trustworthy dialogue about their inner workings of their organization from people that they can trust. After you have shared a story, keep the line of communication open for other stories within the organization that can help reinforce or confirm the messages that you've shared. Creating a platform for other employees to share stories with your comms team can open the human element of your organization. Stories about people working in your organization are likely to get better engagement, and there are great opportunities to showcase and celebrate employees internally. To really open up for your staff to share stories with you, consider these 5 ways of sourcing more stories. Campaign for story submissions. Encourage team competitions. Give employees inspiration to blog about their experiences. Ask for a day in the life of pieces from your employees. And create live video recaps of events. With all of these stories happening all around us within our organization, it's very easy to find them and start creating a newsroom of your own. Now go and put on your journalist hat and start telling your organizational stories. Thank you guys for all the time that you've given me today. It's been wonderful sharing this with you. If you have any questions, I invite you all now to write them into your go-to meeting, and we can start answering some of them. First question that we have is, how will I know if my story did the job it was intended to do? Well, story is the final component to this entire process when it comes to communication. This is why you need to develop your stories, then dig deep into yourself and into the mind of your employees within your organization. Then you find the right words, the ones that trigger the kind of response you're looking for, and test out the stories. Share them to a few colleagues before you put them out there on your company intranet. Once you've told them, the best measurement of success is that people within your organization retell and share those stories. If that starts to happen, you've created evangelists for your message, or maybe your brand or company. This question says, do you have an example of a company who has worked well to collect and curate employee stories? Well, I'm glad you asked because I can personally speak from my own experience on this one. Previous to working here at Interact, I was the internal communications manager at Lush Handmade Cosmetics here in North America. Lush has a huge company goal of creating a cosmetic revolution to save the planet. I'm not going to get into the details of what they do. Please go research it for yourself because they're doing amazing things. But most importantly, to reinforce that company message, we used employee stories. In fact, it worked so well that the news section on the company intranet there is the highest visited space in all of the intranet. Luckily, they're using Interact as their platform for their intranet, which makes it really easy to connect news stories to content throughout their intranet. So you can imagine sharing something about a strategy item through the lens of an employee, but connecting it back to the official communication of the strategy itself. The engagement and celebration that happens on the posts are gold, and they're used to source more stories for future posts. Another question we have, why do you think employee comms teams struggle to think like marketing teams in that people are consumers, and if we treat them as such, they'll consume employer messages better? The reality really is probably time and investment. I think we still have many organizations out there that have seen the power of marketing teams, but invest very little into internal marketing. We do see it changing, however, where more is being invested in the employee engagement section. But this is a missing piece to the employee engagement puzzle. The more that organizations invest time and energy into employee engagement, I think we will see internal comms teams thinking a lot more like external marketing teams. Another question we have, is storytelling mainly an HR function or a marketing function? The golden question, where does it belong? To be honest, it's an everyone function. Stories are everywhere, and the best thing you can do is to funnel them to the right place and space that has the ability to share them for your organization. So if that is marketing, then great. If it's HR, perfect. The reality is your organization's stories should feel good enough to shout them from the rooftop. Your marketing team should want to share the internal stories of your company for their own external use. Stealing from our own Interact mission statement, your people are your biggest asset. The last question I have here is, any ideas on how to moderate or address comments on the intranet? This comes up a lot for us, actually. Comments, good or bad, are actually great for you. Not only does it mean that they've read your entire communication, but it also proves that they're engaged enough to want to say something about it. We should always moderate the comments, and we should be journaling what these comments are telling us. There is no analytics platform in the world that will be able to measure real love or dislike for your company messages than the words from your employees. Don't let the negative get you down, but embrace and learn from it. Depending on how you share information within your organization, it's important for the adoption of the platform that each comment receives some kind of acknowledgement. Celebrate your people in the comments and build a community of people within your organization by using comments on posts as a personal communication tool, if you will. And that brings us to the end. We've ran out of time. Keep your questions coming in. We'll continue to answer them in other ways and in other webinars. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you about storytelling, your internal communications secret weapon. Take care.